right, guys, Coach Chad here, back with another coach's tip. We are now extending some of the work we did on our original press position. So today we're going to talk more about the classic press, as I like to call it. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down the initiation of the press and the rest of the body positions and how we ideally set up the press for safety and performance, which are intimately linked in this movement. Those two live together, all right? So I'm gonna break down some of the common myths of overhead pressing and how you can optimize your overhead strength. All right, let's get into it, guys. We're gonna start with our positioning of the full body in our classic press. Now, we're gonna do a quick review. First video number 1, we talked about rack position gear equipment. So the bar is gonna be set up around collarbone height in the rack. Past that, the basic points that we wanna see in our front rack position is that our wrist is not neutral, not stacked, but pushed back lightly. The bar, in this case my PVC pipe, is going to be just back of the line, the back aspect of my wrist. The bar will be in the mid palm to low palm position. And from the front angle of a rack, I want to see that the forearm is vertical, so elbow underneath the wrist. From a lateral view, the elbow slightly in front of the wrist. And for more details on this, go back to video number 1 to get a little bit more information on that. Now, if we move past the rack position, which is going to be exceptionally important to understanding how to initiate the press, we have to start moving down the entire body. Now, you can't see it in this video, and I'm well aware of that, but well, we'll chat through our foot positions first. When I teach a classic press, I usually ask everyone to stand in a squat stance. Now, most of the time I see people standing with a much narrower stance. Think pulling stance or deadlift stance. Now, of course, this applies to a traditional stance, nothing that's extreme or outside of the laws or the basic norms of squatting. So you're gonna have your toes turned out somewhere between 10 and 30 degrees. Your feet are gonna be about shoulder width apart, or your heels. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to get the appropriate amount of layback in our spinal position or our body that we're going to look for, which I'll discuss later. But it also safeties our low back. And this is exceptionally important when doing overhead pressing. So with a slightly wider stance and a toed out stance, we get a better play on the glutes. Because what I'm going to ask you to do throughout the press is to squeeze your quads and your glutes, your entire lower body, as tightly and as firmly as you can. Now, what this does is it safeties the pelvis and the lumbar spine, the low back. It secures it through muscular tension, which we'll add breath control to later. It secures the pelvis and the lumbar spine from having excessive layback or not enough control around that joint that we may cause some low back pain or SI pain of some sort when pressing, which actually is one of the more common injuries in the classic press. Now, we'll do a side view here for a second so you can kind of see where I'm going with this. I have a wider stance. I squeeze my butt and my quads as tight as I can, and I have a slight layback. So you can see I'm kind of leaning back in my position. I'll try and exaggerate in the video so that you get a good understanding of what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to do. But when you grab the barbell now is going to reside right over top of the appropriate position, the plumb line, which is going to be the navicular bone, right in front of the ankle. That was where the barbell should be lined up with. So I have my appropriate rack position. I'm here, but if I'm just standing nice and tall, that pulls myself, athlete, and barbell complex's center of mass forward. I do not want that. I want that line, that center mass, to be right over the navicular bone here. So I'm going to have a slight layback. And again, squeezing the glutes as tight as we can. Then on the press, I'm going to initiate by driving straight up, head goes back, the body actually leans a little bit. We get most of our lean from the hips moving slightly forward and a little bit of thoracic extension. As we do that, the bar travels straight up, and as soon as it gets to about nose or eye height, we're going to pull our chest back through to our overhead receiving position or our final destination for the press. Now, I'm always cautious to say this because when we first see, or if I coach individuals to do a layback in the press, it usually becomes exaggerated, which then does increase the chance of injury. So I recommend when you're first learning this, keep the weights light and just hone the movement, okay? Simply grease the groove over and over and over again. So you have a very good control of when the torso comes back through, how that feels, and what kind of muscular effort it takes to do that, all right? Now, we'll come back to some of that a little bit later. Now we're gonna talk about breath control because this is the second component of creating tension, which is gonna be really, really important to understanding how to maximize the press. So when doing breath control, I always try and teach athletes that the breath goes this way. You fill here, but most of the time I see athletes doing this, grabbing as much air as possible through their mouth and filling up their thoracic cavity. I want you to visualize taking a breath through your nose, not that that's imperative, but through the nose and breathing deeper into the guts, the diaphragm, or even down to the groin, if that makes sense. So you take a deep breath through in the nose. Here, maybe about 90% capacity, you're gonna feel your abdominal cavity contract. You're gonna feel your obliques and all aspects of your torso push out. That's how you wanna visualize it. You don't wanna visualize pushing the stomach forward. You wanna visualize filling this cavity as much as possible and creating outward pressure. So visualize that whole circle of your cavity, of your abdominal cavity, simply expanding and pushing out. But in your head, it's best to think laterally, okay? So it's a big breath through the nose, like you're gonna take a little punch in the guts, breath, tension, okay? This is different than bracing, okay? You wanna create muscular effort. That's the first method of creating tension, but then you add the breath control to it to improve your tension. And then the last thing, just a little tidbit, I usually recommend wearing a belt for overhead pressing as well. If you have one and you're experienced, put a belt on. It's a big assistant as well to creating that pressure, all right? Now, throughout the press, we're gonna go back to that glute and quad tension. You have to maintain this throughout the entire movement of the press. You're not allowed to let that tension go. That tension, again, is safetying your pelvis and your low back, which is incredibly important, all right? And again, now if we can move forward into bar path, we're gonna think about the bar traveling in a perfectly straight line. Although it won't be, it's gonna have a nice little kind of arc to it, but because you're gonna be thinking about pressing up and back, all right? Now, the reason for the slight layback on the press is twofold. One, it clears the head or the face, the beautiful stuff, out of the way of the bar path. And secondly, allows for a better play of the appropriate musculature in the overhead pressing position. Too many times we see athletes just standing nice and tall, vertical, pressing from here like a classic military press. That's different. I don't want you just to be thinking about front delt, shoulders, and triceps press this. I want you to think more creatively about this. Think of it like you're doing an appropriate bench press, okay? So we're just gonna back up for a second. When you think about bench pressing, you think about driving through the bar, arching the back, arching the chest up, keeping the shoulder in a complex position, stretching the bar out. All of these basic tips and cues that you hear in the bench press are gonna apply to the overhead press, all right? So you grab the bar, squeeze it, pull it apart. That creates an upper back position. The shoulders are ever so slightly protracted. And from here, you want the serratus anterior to start the movement by pulling the scapula up and around. So the scapula pull up this way, the elbows drive up and out, and then they rotate through following the path of the bar. That was a lot to take in. I'm well aware of that, so I'm gonna try and break that down a little bit more, making this video even longer. I'm sorry. So when in that rack position, you wanna think about starting here, squeeze the lower body, drive up and out. But you notice my bar is going straight. I'm not pushing the bar forward. I'm driving my elbows up this way. And again, that does not come from elevation of the shoulder or trap activation. This is another common fault, is that people press like this. This does not add a lot of strength to your position. It might feel like a good little momentum builder in the press, but it stops proper scapulohumeral rhythm. So we're gonna think about pulling the scapula around here, using the serratus anterior to lift up our shoulder blades and pull it around the back and press through to lockout position. Now, lockout position is gonna have, let me back up. When you go to your starting position, your chin is gonna be held high. Your face is gonna come out of the way, keeping your chin high. You'll feel like you're slightly out of balance. As soon as that bar comes to eyes or nose height, you're gonna start pushing forward. Your elbow is gonna start rotating back lightly. You're gonna imagine you're pulling your rib cage down because it's slightly extended at the start of the press. You're now gonna pull it back into position. Press the bar overhead. At this point, the bar is over top of your head or the back aspect of your head, and you're going to drop your chin and push, and you're going to push towards the ceiling. I don't need you to over-exaggerate the shrug, but there's going to be elements of scapular elevation and trap positioning. That's okay, but I want you to be active on your finish. So the head is actually going to be tucked down, the chin lightly down, and a cue I usually use for our athletes is not to drive the head through because you start to get that chicken pecking kind of motion. We don't want that. This is just moved forward from the hips and the torso moving, Okay, so the rib cage slightly locks down, the torso comes forward, or the chest moves forward. So cueing athletes, think push your chest through and drop your chin lightly. So I always visualize I'm angry and I'm staring through my eyebrows, okay? So I bring my eyes down and press to lock up. That's the appropriate overhead position, not this. This does not create stability overhead. This does. This is your appropriate position. Bar held above the scapular spines or the scapula in the back behind the head, and chest through, chin lightly down, but eye gaze remains forward on whatever target you were using throughout your press. All right, now I understand that was a lot of information, so if you have comments or concerns, put them down below and we can have a little chat and get a little bit deeper into it. And if there are some other comments or things that I missed, I'll elaborate in a future video. I really appreciate it, guys. Thanks a lot. I hope that helped. See you later.